Happy Halloween. Before we get started with the stories, there's one thing that I want you to know. This episode is over 45 minutes long, and I've placed one ad to appear after the first story. So beyond that, you can listen to it interruption-free in case you put this on to relax to or to rest to. Let's get started. Alright, so check this out. It was my turn to take the kids trick-or-treating. The previous year it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually, I stay on the street while my kids go up to different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns, so I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick or treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school, and as we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chit-chat with him. I said something like, "Hey, nice weather, right?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again. I said, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for another 15 minutes until suddenly my kids came up to me and said that they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only about a third of the way full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back at the man and his daughter, they were just standing there, still staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied, and I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick or treat and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. And what's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they wanted just to get away from her. I brought my kids home, and I told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all of their candy, but we didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened, but thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing? And who was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. Back in 2015, while my friends and I were in our early teens, I hosted annual Halloween get-togethers at my grandparents' house the day before the 31st with a few close friends. Nothing unusual. There's snacks, movies, games, no drugs or alcohol or anything like that. And since my grandparents lived around a quiet circle just outside town, we would take night walks between the hours of 11 or 3 a.m. just to walk and to talk. For a better idea of the layout of the circle, it's a one-way entrance and exit neighborhood. It's about a quarter mile around with a 10 to 15 minute walk at most. It's built on a hill with two flat stretches of road, one on top of the hill and one on the bottom of the hill. For privacy, I'll be using my friends' initials, A, E, and Z. It was around 12 a.m. on our second loop around the circle. Me and A had grouped up while E and Z grouped up having their own conversations. Me and A got a little ahead of E and Z, and lost in our own conversation, I'd say about 20 feet out, we stopped, and then suddenly we could no longer hear them behind us. We waited for them to turn the corner at the top of one side for around 5 or 10 minutes, I'd say, before changing directions uphill to go look for them. Once on top of the hill, we looked down the flat stretch of road and couldn't see them. Thinking that they had changed directions or had stopped further back than we expected, we circled back the other way. We don't remember exactly how many times we stopped or looped the circle, but somewhere in the area of 4 loops, stopping periodically for 10 to 15 minutes to wait and changing directions once or twice. Me and A started getting concerned and decided they probably went back inside the house, so we headed back inside too, but no avail. We sat and watched out the window for around half an hour, hoping that we'd see them finally pass. I remember feeling sheer panic, thinking that I would have to wake up my grandparents and explain how 2 teenage girls have been missing for almost 2 hours at this point. A wanted me to consider waking them up or even possibly calling the police, assuming the worst. Around 1:30 a.m., now I thought they might have left the circle. We decided we'd go out and look for them once more before waking my grandparents. We walked to the entrance of the circle and yelled for them, but we didn't get any answers. Right when we went to loop the circle again, we saw their light coming around the circle from the other side. We ran to them and asked what happened and where they went. They seemed confused and said they'd only been separated us for about 30 to 45 minutes tops. We looked at the phone and it was 2:10 a.m. We made our way back to the house and passed out shortly after. Me and A just felt an overwhelming sense of relief and could only correct the fact that they had been gone for over 2 hours. For a while, we thought E and Z had just pulled a prank on us and hid somewhere in somebody's lawn, but they both claimed to have never turned out their light or changed directions, only once on their last loop. By all means, we should have seen each other. 5 years later, and I've never really stopped thinking about it and brought it up with the group. E and Z never pranked us. I got both their sides of the story. From E and Z's perspective, they were also in conversation and had noticed that we had gone ahead, but they remained going in the same direction, walking at a faster pace to catch up to us, and they did not stop or change directions. They circled in the same direction for 3 loops and then stopped and checked inside the house before waiting in front of the house for us for what they said was about 10 minutes. They decided to jog back around the circle once more before finding us. They never heard us yelling for them, and before telling them how long they were gone for, they are both adamant that they had been gone for less than an hour. It's impossible that we just kept missing each other, considering me and A changed directions as soon as we couldn't see them, while they kept going in the same direction, and the amount of stops that we took, not to mention the time difference. We all agree it's likely they went into an alternate dimension or reality, considering we can't find any reasonable explanation for being in the same place, but on different timelines. We want to recreate the situation, to test it, maybe now that we all have cell phones and we can see if those lines are affected in any way. But in all honesty, I doubt it would happen again. Being as superstitious as I am, I think entries to different realities open randomly, but I do want to experience it myself one day. Until then, this remains the most unexplainable thing that's happened in all of our lives. This happened about 13 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, including myself, and 1 girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. It's perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you're almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for about 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting lost intentionally. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see exactly what this was. We stepped over the log and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good of a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by the branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as just my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What could we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we couldn't see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail that we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he just pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him and I pointed in that direction, and I said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see this?" He squinted a bit, and the second he saw it, he gasped with everything that he had. He clutched my arm and whispered, "What in the world is that?" What happened next sent shock waves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing. They looked in our direction and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy crap!" I looked back and I saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away in less than 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what had just happened. My heart was pounding, and I knew everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we're all still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children. You get it. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of, "The woods. That had really happened, right?" Well, it most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. This story is so cliche and ridiculous that no one ever believes it's real except for the people that were there. It was Halloween, 2012, my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had the day off after Halloween because it's considered a church holy day. So my friends were game to start our weekend early. On nights where we didn't go to parties, we usually do the same thing. We'd sit on my front steps for a couple of hours and joke around, then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this crappy pizza place across town because the prices were so cheap. Since a few of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we weren't in much of a party mood, so we did our usual. It's around 10 or 10:30 at night, and the pizza joint is closing up. There were three of us: me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finish our food, refill our drinks, and we head out. To get back to my house, we had to cross this large mall parking lot that's about 4 football fields long and maybe 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we aren't dumb, naive kids. We all had grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All three of us were pretty streetwise and were competent out on the street by ourselves, but we experienced something this night that we were totally unprepared for. So, we're walking through this parking lot and it's absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight. And suddenly, we see a white tradesman van creeping slowly behind us about 100 yards back. I know, the old white van cliche, but I swear, this is really happening. I point it out to my friends and we pick up our pace. We pop the collars on our jackets and hunch our shoulders to make us seem a little bit bigger than we are. In an instant, the van speeds up and cuts off our path. Everything in the van is pitch black, so we can't see any people. That's when someone calls out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween. You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't just cut you off in a parking lot unless it has very bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We could run, but they're in a van. They could catch up to us too easily and we'd have our backs turned to them. He says it again. "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I respond, trying to sound tough. "Yeah, but it's over now, so we're heading home and you're in our way." "No, dude, Halloween ain't over. We still got tons of candy in here." The tone suddenly shifted, and still we can't see anyone in the van. The three of us puff out our chests and get ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it dragged on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by sternly saying, "Listen, I don't know what you think you're about to do, but if you don't leave, we're going to kick your ass." Once he said that, the back door of the van swung open, and 2 very tall men stepped out. They had on black suits with black leather gloves and were well-built and strong-looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't just a Halloween prank. At that moment, all three of us just went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. There was no place for us to go. We had no idea how we were going to get out of this situation. And I have no idea what these guys were planning to do with 3 18-year-old men, but they seemed like they knew what they were doing, and we were all getting ready for the fight of our lives. The van stopped, and it looked like they were about to make their move. This was it. I mentioned that there were 3 of us that night. It was at this moment that my other friend, Pat, the one that had stayed silent up to this point, leaned into both of us and quietly said, "This is our Hail Mary. Get ready to run when I say go, all right?" He then picked up one of our sodas and threw it with all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat screamed, "Run!" and we took off across the parking lot. The van squealed off in the other direction and we hurried our butts home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up on their plans. Then we found out what actually happened. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out his drink and slipped a big-ass rock into his cup. Then he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid had just thrown a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It probably knocked him out cold, or it at least bought us enough time to put some distance between us. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that for us. I'm still amazed by it. The moral of the story: Don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose the fight. We had a Halloween party this year. It ran pretty late, and the last few people were leaving around 3 a.m. I was chilling out front, and a dude that no one knew was sweeping up the cans and cigarettes that everybody left outside. We live in the city, so this isn't entirely uncommon. He wasn't homeless, but he was clearly down on his luck and looking for tips. I didn't have any cash, but my roommate Mike ran inside to grab some change for him. It ended up only being literal change, but I hung out and offered him a cigarette and chatted with him. He told me he was pretty much on his last chance. It's hard to get a job on parole, and he was doing whatever he could. He told me that not long ago, someone working at a pizza shop said he could sweep their sidewalk, and all they gave him was a quarter and a soda for his efforts. A quarter and a soda. Everyone else was gone, just me and sidewalk dude, so I go up to bed. I'm still pretty hyped from the party, so I'm just laying in bed on my phone for a while. About 30 minutes later, I hear a voice inside my house downstairs. "Mike, you got the soda?" I went downstairs immediately and saw that the door from our kitchen to our mudroom was closed. There's a door from the mudroom to outside. No one ever closes the mudroom door. It's never closed. I went upstairs to get backup, walked to the mudroom door, and said I was going to open it and that they can just leave. Eventually, I got the courage up to just open it, but no one was there. But the door to the outside was wide open. I closed it, I locked it, and I went to the front door. I made sure that was locked too. When I jiggled the doorknob, I heard sidewalk guy say, "Still here, just sitting outside." I don't know what would have happened had I not heard him, but the reason this freaked me out so bad was that he said, "Mike, you got the soda?" After telling me a story about a crappy person asking him to sweep and giving him a quarter and a soda as payment, when Mike had just given him change. Also, because he was in my house. This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. We lived in a small town where nothing ever happens, and we thought it would be the same that night. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had a lot of fun. At 8 p.m., we realized that we had to head home, but on the way back, we dropped by our teacher's house. She wasn't home, and the street didn't have many streetlights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off, and their Halloween decorations were taken down. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get out of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few streetlights. It was a police officer. Neither of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said an older man living in this house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He kept telling us his police car and partner were just around the block, and we looked around, but we never saw them. I was a pretty paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom loved watching crime shows, and she'd always tell me tidbits of lessons. One of these was a story about fake cops. Although I don't remember the details, I remembered people can pretend to be police officers to gain trust. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard his strange request. He said he needed to speak to this potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed he would hide behind the bushes next to the front door. He would wait for him to invite us in, jump out, and then catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way that I did. We both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could discuss. The cop said yes, but told us that we had limited time. The street was silent, and we could hear everything. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing he would hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us that we had to decide quickly. Around that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said he'd be right back and to not go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him just playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop and we just misunderstanding the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove to the house and the area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I can say that I do regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced that we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it wasn't that alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation, moreover with our parents not being present. I wonder what his motives were, but it will, unfortunately, remain unsolved. So, a little backstory. I'm a sophomore in high school. I live on a small street, no more than 18 houses on both sides. It was built entirely to connect two neighborhoods together, and nobody ever passed through it, so my two friends and I knew everyone on it. So around the time I was 9, the three of us went trick-or-treating on Halloween. We got some candy, dropped it off at my house, and headed back into the neighborhood. On our way there, we ran into 6 high schoolers who asked us what we were doing on their streets, which, as mentioned earlier, was odd because we've never seen them before. Soon, we gave them the term the Heather Crest Ghosts, which was the name of the street. And they showed up every Halloween for the next 3 years until we never saw them again. Flash forward to tonight. I invited some of our friends from school for a Halloween get-together where we would play games, get some candy, and just hang out. Later on in the night, the glitch happened. When we were walking back to my house, we walked past 3 little kids. After doing a head count, I confirmed that there were in fact 6 of us. I pointed it out to my neighbors who were there when we first ran into the Heather Crest Ghosts, and we decided to ask them what they were doing on this street. To our surprise, they responded, "We live here." I've never been so confused, as if random strangers claiming they lived on our street wasn't weird enough. Now we're the random strangers. I went and told them that we actually lived here, and they seemed confused, but then left to go get more candy, I guess. Now, here comes the even weirder part. They were the same age as we are now, because, and I'm assuming, they left for college after the 3 years. But other shenanigans happened in the 2 years following the incident. Now, do I repeat what they did? Or is that just me being crazy? For the vast majority of us, when we think about Halloween haunted houses, or fun houses depending on where you're from in the US, we think of good memories of childhood with friends or family. However, the story I'm about to tell you is one that is truly chilling and sadly all too real. I grew up around 70 yards or so away from a local haunted forest that ran all throughout the month of October. This wasn't your typical kiddie kind of haunted attraction. It got pretty intense, and before you could even go through, you would have to sign a waiver that stated if you were touched, pushed, shoved, or anyone got too in your face, we'll say, that they wouldn't be held liable for any possible injuries as they were hired actors. Well, the first few years that the haunted forest ran, it was very successful but relatively uneventful. As the attraction's success grew, they became more intense and gory with the storylines and the themes. These individuals owned a lot of land behind their home and would work almost all year getting it ready. As far as I know, there was never any reports of paranormal activity or anything in the area, just stories that they made up. But on October 10th, 2007, things took a turn for the worst that the owners were never able to recover from. The haunted forest opened when I was about 10 or 11, so by the time I was a teenager, I was already pretty used to it. But this particular year, things just hit another level of insanity. Around the end of August, the actors that the owners hired would dress up in gory and disturbing costumes and stand at the edge of the road, waving at traffic, walking up and down the street, and prowling around people's land, looking into their security cameras and even at times trying to knock on their doors. We literally have footage somewhere from one of our old security cameras of some moron dressed up like a clown walking around our backyard. Needless to say, this got pretty scary. My father, who's relatively well known around town, started to hear rumors that the owners were actually hiring ex-inmates as the actors because they would be willing to go farther than any other hired actors for much less money. They started to cause a bit of a stir in my neighborhood, and the police warned the owners of the haunted forest to keep their actors in check. But on October 10th, less than 45 minutes into the haunted forest being open, we saw 3 police cars with blaring sirens cutting in front of the house. Not long after, the police began to send people away, and the attraction was shut down immediately. A girl who lives in our area, who will remain nameless, was stolen from her house the night before and was found very early the next morning crawling out of the woods by a local cul-de-sac. What happened to her from the point she was taken to the point in which she made her way back to the cul-de-sac for help, I honestly don't know, but to be completely truthful, there's enough evil in this world as it is, and knowing that she was okay just became enough for us. The only thing she ever revealed to anyone was that it was 2 of the actors from the forest, in full costume, that abducted her. The police began to do a full search of the forest after apprehending the individuals from their payroll information held by the owners of the forest. The individuals were sent back to a prison out of state, and the forest was permanently shut down, as well as the business license revoked from the owners for not taking proper and attentive care to not hire potentially dangerous individuals. Obviously, this is not always going to be the case. However, the next time you plan on going to any kind of haunted attraction, bear in mind, you have no idea the kind of people that are hiding behind those masks. When I was a little kid, my family, which is my mom and my dad and my 2 older sisters, lived in a condominium complex. The small smattering of condos made up a very tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. When I was 11 years old in 1993, a new family moved into the complex. It became quickly apparent that these people were going to be very different from our other neighbors. A real unsavory group of people. Their music would blast loudly into the night. Constant shouting matches between the husband and wife would turn violent, and police would be called, and equally unsavory visitors would drive through the neighborhood only to stop by for a few minutes and then leave after product was exchanged for cash. Having had enough of this family's antics, the neighborhood association, made up of the parents of several of my friends, including mine, petitioned the owners of the complex to evict the family, which came to fruition in August of 1993, only a few months after they moved in. Needless to say, the patriarch of the family was not happy. He and his brood had been shown the door, and he vowed to get back at everyone. A seemingly idle threat. Several weeks later, his threat seemed like a distant memory, and with Halloween quickly approaching, preparations were underway for the ghoulish festivities. However, before the 31st, we had to deal with the 30th, which, depending on where you are in this world, is known by several names. Mischief Night, Devil's Night, or in my neck of the woods, it's known as Cabbage Night, due to a long-standing tradition of leaving skunk cabbage, a blood-red flowering plant that smells like skunk and is mildly toxic, on people's doorsteps. This particular October 30th, my mother and I were putting out some last-minute decorations, mainly cheap ones recently bought from a local store called Caldor, and carved jack-o'-lanterns when the smell of burning wood filled our noses. Our initial assumption that someone had a fire going was quickly dashed when an eerie orange glow from the wooded area that separated our complex from the neighboring street could be seen. Soon, a heavy cloud of smoke covered our neighborhood, and the fire department had been called. One good thing about our complex was the fact that the safety complex, where the police and fire departments were located, was basically a stone's throw away. After hooking up their hoses to the hydrants, the fire was quickly extinguished before it could spread to the houses, and the excitement quickly died down. The next day, as us kids excitedly counted down the hours to trick-or-treat time, the adults worried as to the cause of the fire. They unfortunately didn't have to wait long because a security camera mounted at the complex's entrance provided the answer when an all-too-familiar black pickup truck was spotted entering and then quickly exiting several moments later. While I'm not sure what, if anything, happened to the overzealous former neighbor of ours, he did stop coming around. On Halloween night, when I was around 12 or 11, I stayed up late on my Switch with my headphones plugged in. It was late, at least like midnight, and I decided to go get some water in our outside fridge that was in the garage. I have to mention that my parents had friends sleeping in the trailer outside, so the door was unlocked to go into the garage just in case they came inside during the night for whatever reason. When I got out of my room to go get the water, I brought my Switch with me and my headphones are still plugged in, but right before I get to the garage door, I decide to turn off my Switch and take my headphones off. I had no reason to do this, and it's not something I'd normally do at that age, but it might as well be the reason that I'm here today. When I put my hand on the garage door handle, now with my ears free, I heard a loud crash in the garage. My body went cold, and it felt like I was made out of white noise. But I didn't freeze. I calmly checked the door handle by turning it slowly as to not make noise, and once I realized it was unlocked, I locked it quickly. Right as I locked it, the door handle started to turn and rattled rapidly 4 times. I ran to my parents' room and I knocked loudly, effectively making them both wake up. And they asked me what was wrong through the door, and I said, "Please tell me one of you is outside in the garage right now." My dad answered no, and after I told him what happened, he said it was most likely their friends just wanting to come in and told me to unlock it. Believing them, I went outside with a kitchen knife. I watch enough horror to know how to be careful. The next morning, my parents asked their friends if it was them to find out that not only did they hear someone trip and whisper a curse word, but none of them left the trailer that night, and I had effectively stopped and scared off an intruder. The door is now always locked at night now. This happened last year around Halloween time. My boyfriend and I were shopping and saw some Halloween shirts on sale. They were just black with cat eyes on them, and we thought it would be cute to match. We looked for our sizes and looked through the shirts. There are different styles on the shelf with different pictures, but they're organized neatly and we don't pay much mind to the others. We hold up the shirts to ourselves and let the others see. Then we both look in the mirror together while holding up our cat shirts and commenting about how we're already turning into old cat people. He hands me his shirt directly and I have mine already in my hand, and we go to the checkout. We self-check out. I look at both of our shirts before scanning them, and then put them in the same bag along with some of our other groceries. It was only one or two other items that we had to pick up. When we get home, we both want to wear them as pajama shirts, and I pull mine out of the bag. It's cute. He pulls his out, and it's a completely different shirt. It's the wrong size, and it's even a completely different pattern. And the pattern isn't even on the front. It's the whole shirt. It's got this orange metallic design all over it. There's no possible way to confuse the shirts. Not to mention, I never put them down, and we went straight to the checkout, where I looked directly at both of the shirts before putting them in the bag and then leaving. We were both extremely perplexed, and honestly, we still are. He threw the shirt out because it was ugly, and again, not his size. I kept mine, but it wasn't as fun since we didn't match. I don't really have an explanation. He couldn't have played a prank on me because I had the shirts the whole time, then looked at them multiple times, and it was just such a short time span when all this happened. Whenever I see that cat shirt, I'm left wondering, what really happened?